Higher education is organized by the ethical section of European Association Professor Emeriti in collaboration with the Science and Research Center. It's a laboratory for linguistic and social innovation. And we are very glad to be together organizing this webinar. I can say that maybe not everybody knows what is EIP. EIP is an association promoting research and teaching in higher education among academics and professors and wider. And the seat of association is in Athens, and the official languages are Greek and English. The ethics section deals with dilemmas, with problems on ethics in various disciplines. Laboratory for Linguistic and Social Innovation is a space for collaboration, cooperation, and co-creation and realization of mutual community, and organized as a unit of Science and Research Center in Slovenia, Koper, Capodistria. Before moving to the proposed topic for this webinar, I'm very sorry that George Christodoulou, the outgoing president of AEPE, cannot be with us for health reasons. I don't see if Luigi Campanella is here. Luigi, are you here? Yeah?
Yeah.
So I'm very glad that the chairperson of the section will give us some remarks and introductory words. The floor is yours, Luigi. Do you have to share something or not?
Okay.
Okay, Luigi.
Okay, Lucia, okay. Very well. So thanks to you for having organized such kind of webinar with a choice of the topic really appreciable, because it's not common and is out generally from the discussion, but is a very important point. So thanks to you for this, and thanks to the participants to our meeting of today. I want just a few words for introducing this topic, and I start from a larger, a more general point, that is globalization. Globalization is a very common word during our time, and when we speak about it, we have generally two different positions, like a medal with two faces. One face is the good face. That means that the globalization helps poor to be richer and helps weaker to be stronger, is able to transfer knowledge and innovation, and generally is considered an aid for the development of the earth, of our global world. But there is also the other face of the medal that is not so positive, because we consider that globalization kills the national tradition, is able to make lost some important historical patrimonies of our countries and regions. So we have two aspects, one in contrast of the other, to characterize globalization. Well, I think that we will substitute to the word globalization the word lingua franca. We have the same questions, the same points, the same doubts, and probably also the same uncertainties about which is the right answer to this question. So I think that today we can really deal with an argument very, very interesting and able to be discovering in the different points. So trying to give a contribution to the culture development of the scientific community, and especially in the third age of the life. Thank you.
Thank you, Luigi. Among registered participants, Emeritus Professor Marcel van Voorde from the University of Technology in Delft and Petru Dan from Romania announced their participation in the discussion already. I will be glad to give them some time during the first break between the presentation and the final discussion also. As you have already, we decided after the two first presentations to invite you to give questions or some remarks, so we would be able to note your questions and then answer later at the final discussion. As you have already read some notes on lecturers, in the program already, I'll briefly review their references before giving them the floor. I'm Professor Emerita at the University of Primorska and a senior researcher in multilingualism and intercultural communication at the Science and Research Center of Koper. My research concerns multilingualism, bilingualism, interculturalism, and especially early bilingualism. So I will share now my slides and start my presentation. Thank you. Okay. Okay, if we are mapping the linguistic and cultural diversity of Europe, we can say that linguistic and cultural mosaic per se, Europe is and will remain. The EU member states, all 23, has taken the decision to make entire population multilingual, respecting minorities, and all 23 languages as official languages of the European Union, and 60 regional or minority languages to be protected. But we know that plurilingualism is not a finite construct. So anyhow, heteroglossic and multilingual reality requires new approaches and new visions of the situation. All these cultural, linguistic, ethnic, and political identities and their practices overlap and lead to hybridity. Linguistic pragmatism is something that is very practical. So a common communication code to successful cooperation is recommended and is used really. I will present just some important documents of European Union. The first one is Framework Strategy for Multilingualism of 2006, where it was supported by almost all European member states. But it was not obligatory. That means that it's just recommended to teach two languages aside mother tongue, to establish plans and active plans and promote multilingualism with different work packages and frameworks, improve teacher training, especially training to teach early language, even at preschool, and promotion of multilingualism in language learning at universities, introducing European indicators. What are they? There are two important documents. The first one is Common European Framework of References for Languages, and the second one is Pluralistic Approach to Language and Culture, named FREPA. the two one are used. I think that everywhere they are also translated in different languages. Society needs also technologies for learning languages, so it's also recommended to promote them and to facilitate the multilingual economy. The second one is the establishment of civil society platform of multilingualism in 2009. This platform is open to members, but also to all. It's dealing with social cohesion and intercultural dialogue, especially giving opportunities for migrants to learn languages of the host country, but also maintain their mother tongue. And very important is the use of media as channels for intercultural dialogue. The policy that European countries must follow should be a sustainable language policy to safeguard the diversity of minority, regional, and migrant languages. And it's very important to give the possibility to all citizens learning languages in all their lives. If we conclude, those documents till now are not very changed, but it's important, these few things, really to learn more than one language, that's the mother tongue, that's normal, but not just one, not just English, but at least two. And especially stressing the language of the immediately neighboring country. And then achievement of certifiable standard in English, and just design or even work on a language policy perspective. Why we are asking why the neighboring languages? The neighboring languages are important as per geographical, historical, cultural, linguistic, and personal proximity. They give not just another view on languages, but they are also an economical advantage. Just a quick look on the impact of lingve franke through time, in the past. Here you can see that some of them just have been languages, lingua franca for millennia or for centuries, like ancient Greek or Arabic and so on. Then you have Portuguese for a few centuries in Africa, Indian Ocean, in southeast of Asia. Spanish also in Americas and Philippines. French for 3 centuries. French has a special role, especially in diplomatic work. And then, lastly, English spread via British Empire from 19th to 21st century, and later on, English was globally language. We have also religious languages like Latin in Europe or Arab in the Arabic or in Islamic world. For instance, I give you an example that not every lingua franca exists. We had in former Yugoslavia, Serbo-Croatian offered like lingua franca, but in Slovenia never passed by. That means the Slovenian, we conserve our language even if the Serbo-Croatian was offered. I will present Philipson, Robert Philipson, different works, not just this one of 2009. But even before him, there was Greenwood that gives the importance to English, like English as a student's language in science, in higher education, and so on. But Philipson gave us this list. He wrote Lingua Economica, they're especially American in general, but English, we call it English. Lingua Economica in business and advertising and language of corporate economy. Lingua Emotiva in Hollywood, imaginary or popular songs and and consumerism, lingua academica in research, international conferences, a medium in higher education, lingua bellica, we have now approved lastly. And the lingua americana, especially americana, social networks and tools, notification services, and digital language. I will give you a proof with this statistic. Not just Bologna reform that introduced in parallel English language, but then time by time, even by time becoming even the only English, the only language in student exchanges under the Erasmus. Also in schools, you have here Eurydice Network edition from 2023, where 39 education systems give English as the first foreign language, but not foreign, the second language in schools. And the last proof is in the Commission website. I have the data from 2009 in Eurobarometer. Hierarchy of languages, you can see, in 1996, it was 40% as lingua official, as a language official of European Union, French and English. French has 40% of documents written in French. Now, not now probably less, but in 2009, 11,8. And look at English. It was 46 in 1996, and in 2009, it was already 20% of all documents. But you can see it, the proof is everywhere. In social networks and electronic sources, mainly in English, in songs and slang of the youth, the selected books translated in English. I can give you just the data from the book fair in Slovenia of 2025. It was more than half of books in English offered. Then in business operation and in scientific publication, study programs, especially doctoral and master studies, and working language of conferences, consultation, workshops. You can see that EIP has as official language English and Greek, especially Greek, because the cities in Greece. Let me conclude. My time is not so extended. What are the conclusions? We have to design sustainable language policy if you want to maintain the linguistic diversity. And for this reason, we have to provide adequate multilingual frameworks for new approaches to develop and implement it, more motivating methods for teaching different languages, not just English. And as multilingualism is not finely constructed, as the users are created, they create cross boundaries of languages, their way to use languages. We can take, for instance, the trans languages, the simultaneous use of two or more languages to give sense. For instance, the connection between the language of origin and English. But sorry, I can say that this way of combining English and national language gives more importance and increased proficiency in English, not in the mother tongue. Yes, a few words of neighboring languages. I have already said. I proposed, and we proposed, Slovenian especially, to study, for instance, in the border areas, Italian and Slovenian in both territories, or German in Slovene, or Croat in Slovene. That means that minority and neighboring languages present all the 60 languages of European Union. So we have covered all languages if we study neighboring languages. What can we do? We have to invest in preservation of linguistic diversity, in live communication, in materials, in all our acts of using languages, and learn languages in schools, especially neighboring language, that I propose to have a special status in European policy. For the special status and protection of linguistic specificity, I appeal now to languages of lesser used languages and endangered languages to design. Every member state has to design a sustainable policy of language policy, but also coexistence and peace. And sure, with all this goes new definitions of teaching languages. Today we will talk about something on all the cases that I opened. The language use of English is important, I know, but it's already used in lectures, in scientific publication, in conferences, in academia. So it is already lingua franca. We can't leave the displacement of national language has been threatened, especially widespread minority and regional languages. As we talk today about ethical questions, it is an ethical problem, the linguistic inequality. It leads to a decline in human autonomy and social interaction, in individuals' rights to use their native languages, and the rights of linguistic community to develop their language in all areas of use. So the conclusion is that the only solution is developing sustainable language policy. And just a little things not to forget that languages were always the topic of discussion. Even in that I just quote Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Essai sur la langue, sur l'origine des langues, the 1781. La langue distingue l'homme entre les animaux. Le langage distingue les nations entre elles. On ne connaît d'où est un homme qu'après qu'il a parlé. L'usage a le besoin pour apprendre chacun de cette langue. Pardon. L'usage a le besoin pour apprendre chacun la langue de son pays. Mais est-ce qu'il fait que cette langue est celle de son pays et non pas un autre? But what makes this language the language of his country and not that of another? Thank you very much for your attention. Now I continue with our meeting, giving the word to Andrei.
Thank you. I will share.
Just a minute, Andrei. I would like to present yourself. Andrei Dan, George Andrei Dan, is Emeritus Professor at the University of Pezin, Carol de Villa, Bucharest, Romania, and honorary member of the Romanian Academy of Sciences. His academic and scientific work focuses on cardiac arrhythmias and cardiovascular pharmacotherapy, but he's also an active piano and organ player. The floor is yours, George.
Thank you so much, Lucia. I'm more than honored to be invited to this select meeting by you and Luigi. Indeed, I am not a linguist, I'm a cardiologist, and my task is to discuss a little bit about the Latin language and to answer to the question if Latin language is a dead language, and I should confess my students believe it is. My only conflict of interest is that I have to speak about the roots of my language in English and not in Latin, because probably it will be impossible to be understood if I am talking in Latin. However, I would like to tell you in the pure Latin, classic Latin, nulla lingua musicam lingve latine habet, hec autem musica immortalis est atque omnibus linguis humanis pertinet, which means no language have the music of the Latin language, and this music is immortal and belongs to all human languages. But before discussing the death and the transformation of Latin language in the lingua franca, let's discuss a little bit about the born of the Latin language. There is a myth that from the beginning, the Latin language was the language spoken in the area of the future Roman Empire. It is not so. In the beginning, which means in the 7th century BC, only a very small area of Latium near the Palatinum hills were populated by Romans from Romulus, and they were spoken language which resembles a little bit the dialect of Uscan or Umbrian. Important, the Latium is in the south of a much developed and bigger region, which was the Etruscan region, the actual Tuscany. The Etruscan region was very developed. Nobody knows which was the language because it was lost. It was not an Indo-European language. However, it influenced a lot the next Latin language because some technology was missing in the Latin language, like windows, fenestra, or persons, persona, which is in fact the mask of the theater. The writing in Latin developed quite later because it was formed following the Etruscan alphabet, and the first example of Latin writing is the so-called Praeneste fibula. You can see here, just a moment to have a pointer. You can see here this fibula. The sense of reading is a little bit Semitic from the right to left. And what is written is Manius me fecit numerios. Manius did it for Numerius. And this happened in the 6th century BC. It is the first example of Latin writing, which is in the heritage of the Etruscan alphabet. The Roman language became Latin language quite late. By the 3rd century BC, the Romans were undisputed the masters of entire Italian peninsula, and the Latin language became a real respectable language. And the name was moved from the Roman language to the language of the Latium region, which is exactly the Latin language. The second myth is the idea that the Latin language became lingua franca because of the Roman superiority. And a very respected linguist, David Crystal, wrote once, "It may take a military powerful nation to establish a language, but it takes an economically powerful one to maintain and expand it." And we will discuss about it also about English later. So in the territory of the Italy and the next Roman Empire, all these territory were populated by many peoples speaking their own language, and a Roman expansion spelled practically death of many of these languages like Celtic and other. However, which is amazing, Romans are not very interested in writing because they are warriors. And the first example of the writing in Latin we'll find only in the 2nd century BC, the so-called De Agricultura, about agriculture, written by Publius Porcius Cato, called the Elder. And this is the first example of a book written in Latin. In fact, at the beginning, Romans were just copycats. They took Greek culture and adapted it for Roman audience, especially theater, because they were very interested in entertainment. And what is important, Latin and Greek are cognate languages. They are some kind of siblings. They both developed during a very long time, but we cannot date one before the other precisely. What is important that pointing to the Greek, to whom they owe so much, the Latin took the Greek words enkritentes, which mean masters of oneself, and created and coined the term classics. They created the so-called the classical Latin. And the first book of the Latin grammar and spelling were developed 500 years after the beginning of the Latin language, and it is in the 1st century BC, and it was the Lingua Latina Libri, the book about the Latin language, 25 books written by the Roman scholar Marcus Terentius Varro. Now, let's discuss, is it Latin a dead language? The Linguistic Society of America postulated that many other languages are no longer being learned by new generation of children or by new adult speakers. The languages will become extinct when the last speaker dies. In fact, dozens of languages today have only one native speaker still living, and that person's death will mean the extinction of the language. It will be no longer spoken or known by anyone. So, is this a bad concept? Not. It is a reality. I give you two examples. In Papua, the Lawa language disappeared because the last native speaker died in 1987. Another example is the Tepecano, which is an indigenous language in the Mexico region. The last native speaker died in 1980, so Tepecano is now extinct. Arguably, the last member of the community of native Latin speakers died in the 7th century. However, extinction didn't happen with Latin. Instead, during the medieval, Renaissance, and early modern periods of Europe, this was the real lingua franca. There were no community using it ordinary. However, from this time and to the modern time, a lot of people used it in institution. It is useless to remind philosophy, theology, or law using Latin, but also some modern authors like Erasmus, the German Melanchthon, Thomas More, Newton, Linnaeus, Reginald Foster, Alois Eger, and in the last years, even Rowling used Latin in the original form to write. Far from being dead, Latin was the most important language of the world during this time. In fact, the genes of the Latin language transmitted to so-called the Romance languages, the Neo-Latin languages, which involve nearly 900 million native speakers, and you have here the repartition of these speakers, with Spanish in the 54% of them, Portuguese, French, Italian, Romanian, Catalan, and some others. All these languages divided in several categories, mixing with the local ingredients of the language. And you can see here, I don't want to enter in detail. You are probably better specialist than I am in this field, but you can see here the different groups and branches containing all the roots of the Latin language. There is a theory, the so-called border theory of the language, which presumed that the border of the Roman Imperium, which was Spain and Romania, preserved most the roots of the Latin language. And indeed, this explains why we can understand quite well Italians, even without knowing or being taught in Italian. And you have here not only in Europe the repartition of the Latin languages, but also in the world, you know very well, the Latin languages are more alive than ever. And if we compare the languages which are most spoken, indeed, English is the most spoken language at this moment, but if we are looking to the most native speakers, Spanish is, after the Mandarin Chinese, the second language. So a Latin language in the 21st century is still alive. It has an academic and professional utility, is a terminology of law, of medicine, of science and theology. It has a cultural and historical context. It provides access to foundational literature, history, and philosophy, and also an educational foundation, which is very important. It helps students to understand the structure of their language. If we compare, theoretically, we make a parallel between Latin and English as a lingua franca, this is feasible. I remind you that the term the lingua franca comes from the Frankish language, which was a language around the 11th and 19th centuries, around the Mediterranean area, which was a mix of languages. And I remind that 50 to 80% of English vocabulary has a Latin roots. And again, if we want to have a parallel as lingua franca between Latin and English, there are several pros and cons for each of one. Latin is, of course, a second language. English is a language, the first language of hundreds of millions of natives. Latin is a politically neutral language. English is linked to the geopolitical power. Latin has a very stable grammar. English is rapidly evolving. Latin is more convenient for the scholarly elitist. English is globally accessible. Even if we take the English, the English students should learn not only the Germanic roots of the word, like father from Vater in German, or best from Tod in German, but also the Latin language, because a lot of words, as you can see here, for example, in pater, which is father, or mors, which is death, there are a lot of English terms containing these roots. Moreover, in understanding the grammar of the modern English, we should come back to the Latin, because otherwise it is difficult to understand why the plural of memorandum is memoranda, why the plural of the appendix is appendices, why the plural of the alumnus is alumni, etc. And also a lot of symbols in mathematics, and not only the terms we are using in law and in our day-to-day vocabulary come from Latin. I will finish with several theological and philosophical concepts about Latin as a life language. First of all, Latin is an official church language in some churches, Lucia already showed. It is a sacred language, and it is not sustained by native speakers, but by the liturgical continuity. In theology, tradition is not a memory, but a living transmission. And if the Latin is a vessel of doctrinal transmission, it means that it is a living organism belonging to the Church of Mystical Body. Even more important, philosophically, the Latin language fulfills all the requirements of a living language. It's structured, it's a vehicle for rational thought, and is a beer of metaphysical distinction. And maybe one of the most advantages is the very fixed nature of this language. I'll stop here, ladies and gentlemen. I hope that I convinced you that Latin is not a vernacular organism, but it is a formal instrument of continuity. In fact, it is the DNA of the modern languages. And as Ovidiu Publius Naso was a writer in the ancient Roman Empire who was exiled in Romania, therefore he was a non-native Romanian speaker, but a native Latin speaker, said, Felix qui audacter defendit quod amat, happy the one who boldly defends what he loves, and I sincerely believe that the Latin language is a living language. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrei, George. It was very interesting overview of Latin that is still alive, and I agree on this, surely. Okay, now Professor Van der is not here, Van der Voorde, so I ask others participants if they have some remarks on the first two presentations. We can just take some notes on it if there are.
May I comment something?
Yes, please.
Can you hear me if I speak from here? Okay. I'm really fascinated from this speech. The last, of course, the first of our Lucia, but the fact that I'm Irina from this Land Lab, I'm coordinator, and I'm not really a linguist, but I work with educational linguistics. And I'm also a musician, so I'm really fascinated by this path that you explain, Mr. Tan, Professor Tan, between music and Latin, and I'm coming from Italy, and you knowing also all these ancient dialects or languages like Etrusco and so on. It's really another way of looking at languages, which is very, very useful, because we are so inside and embedded in our study of linguistics that a vision from outside is so, I repeat, fascinating. So it was just a comment. Thank you very much. I will keep in my mind, in my heart.
Thank you, Irina. That the dialogue between two music fans. Yes, okay. If there is no other remarks, we can invite now Michael. Michael, yes?
Yes.
I will present yourself, Michael. Hello. I see you for the first time. How are you?
Yes, likewise. It's good to see you, Lucia.
Yeah. Professor Michael Bix is Emeritus Professor of Aesthetics at the University of Hertfordshire. I'm sorry to pronounce that. UK. His interdisciplinary research in philosophy focuses on non-linguistic communication and theories of knowledge in the creative arts. We are looking forward to hearing more on this. The floor is yours, Michael.
Thank you very much, Lucia. Hello, everybody. I would like to share my screen. So let me do that. Yes, hopefully you can see my screen now. And I'm going to start with something that overlaps with information that was in George's presentation, but bear with me. I want to begin with data around the extent of English as a lingua franca and follow with some thoughts about advantages and disadvantages. So in this slide, we see the historical position that we've all been used to until recently. On the left is the number of first language speakers, and on the right is the number of academic publications by language. Note that Chinese, on the left, is by far the most widely spoken first language, whereas Chinese language publications are too few to include. English is the third most spoken first language, indicated by the yellow arrow on the left, but far and away the most published academic language, as indicated by the yellow arrow on the right. In comparison, Spanish is more or less equally widely spoken as English as a first language, the green arrows, but very much less represented in academic publishing. This Anglophone dominance has been further reinforced by the policies of publication databases. For example, Scopus contains 93% English language articles, even though the inclusion policy accepts 40 different languages. Further reinforcing the bias towards English, Scopus requires English language titles and abstracts for all research articles, an English language journal homepage, and references to be in Roman script. Languages that are frequently intertranslated are called high-resource languages, and a systematic review in 2023 of the use of translating technologies found that only 1/4 of the studies included a low-resource language. Moreover, in nearly 2/3 of the studies, English was the target language of the translation, where non-Anglophone scholars seem to be using translation tools as writing aids to produce texts for publication in English. The study concludes that translation tools are not necessarily helping to displace English as the key language of scholarly communication. It's not necessarily creating a genuinely multilingual scholarly communication ecosystem. Instead, the responsibility for translation in scholarly publishing continues to rest on the shoulders of non-Anglophone scholars, while the English-speaking scholars, I admit like me, remain in a privileged position. Some of this is shown alternatively in this graphic from 2011. Sorry, I didn't have a more up-to-date one. It shows the proportion of English language academic publications compared to Spanish language, French language, etc. The large coloured rectangles are the language groups, with subsections showing the country of origin. Also note here that the lightness or darkness of the country rectangles indicates their impact factor. Within the English language sector, there is not only a large production, but also large impact. And this influences what we're going to see next. Since 2011, since that data that I just showed you, there has been a 5-fold increase in academic publication from China. This is mostly monolingual in either English or Chinese. Over this period, China has risen to become the world's largest producer of scientific knowledge. According to Digital Science's Dimensions database, last year there were almost 830,000 papers that features researchers based in China, representing about 15% of the total. According to the journal Nature, China overtook the United States in 2022 for the number of contributions to natural science articles. The majority of this research was disseminated in journals published by companies in Western countries rather than in China's own domestic publishers. The biggest 20 international publishers by output published 83% of all the research articles involving authors based in China. The Chinese government has stimulated this growth through investment, boosting academic publishing in a mixture of Chinese and English languages. The majority of this has been in English language publishing because Chinese government seeks impact for its research on the global stage. Chinese language publishing infrastructure is weak, and since Chinese is not widely spoken as a second language, the readership for Chinese language academic publishing is not international in its reach, and is therefore limited in its impact. And this shows that, aside from the fact that English is now a widely used second language, the main international driver for publication in English is impact factor. If Chinese researchers establish themselves as high impact and therefore setting the research benchmarks in various fields, the role of English as an academic language may be challenged. This could happen relatively quickly, so there may be a new demand for machine translation into Chinese from English in order to maintain impact in a new world of Chinese language publishing. Also, at a technical level, internet domain names, URLs, in non-Roman scripts were only facilitated in 2009, long after the establishment of the internet as a basic academic resource. This delay has enabled Roman script to be established as the dominant medium, to the advantage of Western countries. The marginalization of non-Roman scripts has also had the effect of restricting access by some users. For example, keyboards may not have Roman characters. This advantage of access is coming to an end. Today, one can copy-paste Chinese characters, as I did here, into Google and get Chinese language results on a UK-oriented browser, and then simply use Google Translate to read them in English. Therefore, technical solutions could easily facilitate a transition towards the global dominance of the Chinese language instead of English. Clearly, both the language and the writing system have consequences on the visibility, access, and potential for impact. And there are technical, historical, and cultural dimensions to these issues. Unfortunately, the increasing visibility of non-Eurocentric research has been accompanied by an increase in the retraction rate from those countries. Medicine, engineering, and materials science are particularly affected, with high rates of retractions for papers involving collaborators from Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Russia, and elsewhere. These fields have high human impact, involving life or death problems, and therefore there are ethical implications for any publish or perish policies such as those demanded by the Chinese government. Language is more than just a set of technical terms. It is a culture of communication, and a surprising amount of this communication is based on language-specific set of metaphors. Metaphors rarely translate effectively because the underlying assumptions about time and space vary, especially when translating between cultures with different scripts and writing systems. Interdisciplinary research teams of cognitive scientists and sociolinguists have identified that everyday objects tend to be arranged in space according to a mental timeline, which varies in direction across cultures. For example, they found that Arabic speakers who write from right to left tended to associate spatial distribution towards the left as indicating the future, and conversely, distribution to the right as associated with the past. This is the opposite of the spatial metaphor for past and future that English speakers demonstrate. There have been similar experiments of spatial metaphors and association with time and sequencing in other languages that involve right to left to right, up to down, and down to down to up writing practices. And they are part of a wider socio-linguistic context of metaphors and abstract constructs that we inherit from our native language, such as high and low notes in music. These spatial metaphors for time are ubiquitous. For example, Google Calendar buttons should really correspond to the user's sense of past and future to optimize the user experience and avoid confusion. Another study revealed that English speakers arrange temporal sequences to progress from left to right, whereas Hebrew speakers, who write from right to left, arranged them in the opposite direction. It also showed that English speakers had faster reaction times when the key they had to press to indicate that an event happened earlier than another event was located on the left, compared to where the key was located on the right. And conversely, Hebrew speakers did the opposite. These linguistic influences have real-world consequences, for example, in the design of nuclear safety equipment or fighter aircraft, where the layout of controls that must be undertaken quickly and in a sequence may have life or death consequences. Even in the prosaic context of advertising that we see here, the message is more effective if the shampoo is presented as the first option and the conditioner as the second option. And this advert will look different for English language users who write from left to right than Hebrew speakers who write from right to left. So given the fundamental role that metaphor plays in our understanding of abstract concepts, we should be concerned about any collapse of linguistic diversity because of the consequential collapse of metaphoric diversity. If we only understand new and challenging concepts in terms of one set of metaphors, isn't that going to limit not just our research communication, but also our knowledge advancement? Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I think that there will be questions at the end.
Good.
Yes, thank you. Now, I think that linked to your presentation will be the presentation of Andrei. He has to say something about pro and contra English as lingua franca. Haven't you, Andrei?
Thank you so much, Lucia. I have a bad cold, so I hope I am not mixed with my cough. It's okay. I suppose my slides are okay. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. I come back after the excellent lecture of Michael, and because of this, my only, if it goes, my only conflict of interest is that everything that was essential to say has already been said by Professor Chok and Bix. So I'll make a glossa practically on what was already said. The beginning is, of course, for everybody, the Tower of Babel and Nimrod, who built the Tower of Babel in order to be closer to the heaven. But my question is, before God confounds human speech so that they can no longer understand each other, leaving finally the tower city unfinished, which was the common language? Nobody knows. However, certainly it was not English. So let's discuss a little bit the teleology. Lingua franca historically evolved from the Latin we just discussed in the medieval scholarship. The French language was dominant in diplomacy and science in the 70s, 80s centuries, and German language was very important in the 19th and 20th century, especially the beginning of the 20th century. How was the transition to English? It was not by hazard. First, it was because of the expansion of the British Empire, and not of less importance, the rise of United States, giving major research funding, leading universities, technological innovation, and importing practically the best scientists from Europe in United States. Moreover, everybody knows that after the World War II, many scientific centers in Germany and Central Europe declined, and prominent scientists were relocated in English-speaking countries. As a vicious circle was created, major scientific journals increasingly required publication in English because international conferences adopted English, global scientific database prioritized English, and English became necessary for citation, visibility, and academic advancement. And the result, once most researchers publish in English, others must to do so, because every research should be read, should be cited, or should have a collaboration, an international collaboration. So to conclude this point, English is not the best language for science in inherent structural sense. Its dominance is historical, political, economic, and institutional, and not a linguistic superiority. And I should confess, at least for me, English could be a nightmare for a non-native English speaker. Imagine the sufferance only for the pronunciation of bow, calf, through, though, thought for a non-native English speaker. There are the dangers of the global language, and David Crystal pointed it is a very nice book. I like this book very much, The English as a Global Language. The monotheism of the English transform or give the linguistic power. Those who speak a global language as a mother tongue automatically are in a position of power compared with all those who have to learn it as an official or foreign language. The second is the linguistic complacency, because the native speakers in English have no reason to learn new languages, and it is well known that Americans are speaking 0.8 languages. And finally, at least historically, it's possible to result in linguistic death, extinction of a minority of language through language domination. David Crystal concluded that any decision in reject English has important consequences for the identity of a nation. And in red, there is a citation for Gandhi in 1904, which is an emotional word, but he compared the only one language is a sign of slavery. As David Crystal said, there have been very few cases in which the English was rejected, really rejected, and it creates some ripples. However, for David Crystal, one country on grounds of population size alone could represent a major change in the social linguistic situation, and this is the United States of America. If we are going to numbers, you can see here in some kind of repetition to what Professor already shown, that the publication in English is depass copiously all the publication in other languages. Even only 18% of the population speak English. Interesting, in the publication in other language, there is also a mutation. There is a decrease in the publication in French, German, and even in Chinese, and the increase in publication in Russian, Spanish, Arabic, Turkish, or even Indonesian. And these data are for dimensions, which is a huge database containing more than 140 million journals stored in a database. What are the ethical implications for non-native English researcher? If we count that from 1.5 billion people speak English, for the 1.1 billion, this is a secondary language. First is a structural inequality. There are higher publication costs for editing, for proofreading. There is a slower writing process. There is an increased rejection rate for linguistic rather than scientific reasons, and there is a cognitive load during the conference. Also, there is an epistemic inequality because important local research may remain invisible and are not translated in English and considered regional because only what is in English is global, what other languages is only local and regional knowledge. And this is also cognitive and cultural cost. Researchers have to adapt subtly to homogenize the global scientific discourse, to simplify arguments, to avoid cultural specific conceptual frameworks, and to adapt to the patterns of English language versus the own pattern. And you can see here, for a paper published in several years before, that the rate of rejection because of English is huge, especially in the people with low proficiency in English. But this depends also on the income. This is shown in the same. So if I try to summarize this, these are very important figures. A non-English native need 91% more time to read a paper, 51% more time to write a paper. The rate of rejection because of the language is up to 3 times more, and the frequency of language-related revision is 13 times higher. For the presentation, a non-native English consumes more than 94% more time. And what is even worse, that 50% of non-native English speakers decide to not give an oral presentation. And I should confess, I have a lot of problems with my young fellows in this regard. And also, because of this concept, there are important gaps, and I give you only 2 examples here. First are 2 papers published in China, in Chinese. The first one pointing to pigs with avian influenza virus. In another, asking attention to be paid to the pandemic of 2 different subtypes of influenza. Both of these papers entered in the international circuit 14 years before the publication, because the first publication was in Chinese. Another important example, and there are a lot, it is only a selection, is that a study published, you have here the reference, in 2021 in PLOS Biology, screened more than 400,000 peer-reviewed papers in 16 languages, and found that the non-English language can expand the geographical coverage of English language evidence by 12 to 25%. So we are losing a lot of the knowledge because of a language. How to solve the problem? I put this problem to artificial intelligence, because what lingua franca solves? There are several pros for lingua franca. First, mutual intelligibility. People need to understand one another. The second is a coordination efficiency. The conference, the journals, the collaboration, we have a common denominator. And standardization. Terminology is stable across borders. What could artificial intelligence offer? First of all, a real-time speech translation, academic translation, terminology alignment, and context-sensitive semantic interpretation. So with this in mind, I put to the artificial intelligence a question: how could artificial intelligence solve the problem if the translation is instant, accurate, low cost, and integrated in the publishing system? And the artificial intelligence suggested to me 3 scenarios. The first, English remains artificial intelligence assist. Continue writing in English, use artificial intelligence to improve clarity, use artificial intelligence to read non-English material. It is a most probable near future scenario. English dominance goes on. The second scenario, multilingual publishing with automatic translation. Journals allow submission in Chinese, Spanish, Arabic, French, I don't know, and the system automatically produces synchronized translation. So there is no single language dominating. The English becomes one node among another, and this would significantly weaken the concept of lingua franca. And the third and the most radical scenario is replacing the language layer by the semantic layer. Translate not just words, but conceptual structures, standardize terminology dynamically, and map disciplinary vocabularies across cultures. Instead of one shared language, we would have a shared semantic structure, and human language become only an interface. The real common medium becomes machine interpretable knowledge structure. This is less probably in the next future, and it is most radical, but probably this is a direction. If we want that this could work, we need to have a scientific terminology stability, a conceptual precision, especially regarding subtle distinction between notions, think to metaphysics, for example. We should trust in this production, and we should, of course, impose multiple institutional reforms. So finally, this is my last slide. I put here a paper I read several times about written by an American, the role of English in scientific communication, lingua franca of Tyrannosaurus Rex. There are 2 theories we should decide between. First, there is the efficiency theory. Science requires one common language for speed and coordination. Artificial intelligence may reduce friction, but not eliminate the efficiency advantage of one shared language. The second is the infrastructure theory. What science really needs is a meaning, not the language. So artificial intelligence, at least in the future, could provide shared meaning, and the human lingua franca becomes at this moment redundant. I'm sorry for this pessimistic end, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Andrei. We are really experiences, your pro and contras in Slovenia. As Slovenian is lesser used language, and we feel this. But your optimistic view, thank you. Anyhow, I see the optimistic view in your presentation. We are very much respecting the scheduled time, so I invite the last presenters today, Michael, he will give us some open possibility to discuss later if really the dominance of English as lingua franca is an ethical question or not. Please, just feel free to share.
Yes, thank you. Yes, me again. So I'm going to share my screen. And I think what I have to say fits very nicely with what George has just said, particularly about infrastructure theory. I liked that. I didn't know that was what it was called. Where are we? Yes, that one. Okay, hopefully you can see my screen again now. So, in this session, I would like to frame the de facto dominance of English as having not only practical but also economic and particularly ethical consequences in terms of threats to innovation and the impact of a parallel emphasis on the written word as a form of notation, which excludes alternatives such as images, embodiment, etc., as sources of the next generation of understandings and worldviews. So my question is the dominance of English in academia actually an ethical question? Well, one indicator of ethical questions is the presence of the word ought, one of those ones that's difficult to pronounce in George's list. We say that non-English language speakers ought not to be disadvantaged. For this ethical imperative, indicated by the word ought, to have legitimacy, we would need to establish that it is indeed a requirement. Such requirements are often tested by a negation, that is to say, why? Why ought we not to disadvantage a specific language user group? One can imagine the defence that in a world where we all have our native languages, someone will always be advantaged or disadvantaged according to the dominant language in any particular context. The only way to avoid this would be to ensure that scholarly communication is only undertaken in a language that is nobody's native language, for example, Esperanto, or as was the case in the Enlightenment, in Latin. But even if we decide that there is a moral imperative, a legitimate use of the word ought, such imperatives always have more force if there is also an interest in delivering them. Academics from the free market school of thinking might argue that we operate in a capitalistic situation in which the dominant language has already been used to produce the dominant body of scholarly work, and therefore the pressure is on speakers of other languages to write in English. They might point out that there are technical solutions to this situation, such as the use of Google Translate. Although AI translation is not currently as good as a well-trained human translator or someone with good idiomatic English as a second language, it is easy to see that it won't be long before AI translators are as good as most people's non-native use of English. When that happens, our annoying free market thinkers may argue that it would be possible for researchers to write in any language and make their works available to the scholarly community, at least within the 200 languages that were recently promised to us by Mark Zuckerberg. But still, the ease with which native English language speakers can access English language publications will give them an advantage. Perhaps we can compare this to other advantages gained by researchers at prestigious, often English language speaking universities, such as Oxford, Harvard, Stanford, etc. On this basis, it will never be a level playing field for all researchers. Especially in the current global political context, it seems likely that ethical arguments are going to be regarded as optional at best, and at worst, an encumbrance to freedom of trade, freedom of speech, and other free market ideologies. It is a battle to establish that it ought to be different, when the facts on the ground are being used as pragmatic evidence for how it happens to be, and the economics and politics on the ground are being used as evidence of how that isn't going to change. So to establish an ethical case for change in the face of opposition from globally non-ethical politics, we must consider why it ought to be different and not just that it ought to be different. One approach to this comes from sociolinguistics. Languages have different capacities to communicate content. That is to say, some languages are better at expressing certain relationships than others. It's clear even within the European group of languages that, for example, German facilitates creative compound formation that is difficult to translate into English. I'm thinking of Heidegger, who mobilized concepts that relied on differences between zu handen, meaning something like ready to hand, tools, for example, that are useful and therefore somewhat overlooked in favor of their outcomes, and terms like vorhanden, meaning something like merely present at hand, a merely existent object devoid of its utility, perhaps something broken. In translation, these terms are cumbersome and are not effective in English. Not that Heidegger is easy in German for German speakers either, but it makes a lot more sense in German than it does in most English translations. Going further afield, more exotic languages like Hopi or Kurk Thayore may bring with them the ability to discuss fundamental concepts such as time, place, and direction in ways that are different from that facilitated by English. Here I have in mind the arguments around linguistic relativity and whether radically different languages facilitate or even cause or are consequences of different conceptual structures. And this idea of linguistic limitation doesn't end at spoken language, but applies to all forms of expression, writing, and notation. Writing is the notation of language, but language is the notation of our thoughts and ideas. So we also have to annotate music and other socio-cultural phenomena. We could even expand our scope and include image-based communication under our umbrella concept of language and notation. But any form of language and notation is incomplete because it arises in a limited social context in which there is a need to express culturally situated content. For example, Western musical notation has evolved in parallel with the development of musical instruments and a system of harmony. This system of harmony has evolved around specific notes and their intervals, and that can be annotated in musical notation. In our current system, there are no permitted tones between one semitone and another. But in the 20th century, composers such as Messiaen wanted to use quarter tones, and so new notation had to be added so that the idea of a quarter tone could be communicated. Graphic scores take this evolution of conceptual language paired with its notation even further and break away from the strict linearity of the score and of prescribed legitimate notes in a system. Not all spoken languages have a written form. Even in those that do, writing only captures part of what is happening. So in our European languages, conversation analysis has developed additional notation for intonation, body language, etc. In this example, we see a Nahuatl chronology and maps from pre-Columbian Mexico, and these use images and signs simultaneously to tell their history, their royal lineages, and their customs. These are non-linguistic forms of communication that describe concepts of time, place, and movement in ways that are radically different from European cartography or chronicles. My point is that thought, language, and writing or notation are interlinked, and the logical form of the notation, as Wittgenstein might say, determines the boundaries of what can be thought and said. So one response to my question, why it ought to be different, why ought we be bothered by monolingualism, is the pragmatic observation that different languages have different communicative capacities, and the more strange the linguistic or notational structure is, so the more there is an opportunity for novel conceptualizations, such as quarter tones in music or spatiotemporal mapping in Nahuatl. And this pragmatic observation has economic consequences when framed in terms of creativity, innovation, and competitive advantage. So let's be specific about why ought we to do something about monolingualism. I suggest we already have at least 4 practical and 3 ethical reference points. Practically, linguistic pluralism is a fact of life owing to the diversity of natural languages and geographic distribution. However well educated a certain elite are, there will always be a need for translation. Machine translation already takes most of the burden away, but it needs to be trained on good examples, provided by genuinely bilingual and bicultural people. At a more sophisticated level, that culturally nuanced human expertise may always be needed as a check on machine translation in fields such as international diplomacy, literature, poetry, etc. Practically, there is no reason to believe that our best thinkers are necessarily also our best linguists, so there's a risk of ideas being lost in translation. Finally, those Anglophones who do not currently see much of a problem with the hegemony of English may feel less comfortable if the tide turns towards Chinese or Spanish. Ethically, it clearly advantages some and disadvantages others if, in addition to discipline-specific knowledge, one must add an apparently unrelated skill in second language fluency. This is a matter of equity. Somewhere between the practical and the ethical, there is every reason to believe that content may be lost if one limits expression to only one language or notation. The dominance of one linguistically encoded set of concepts has consequences for the marginalization of differently encoded content. This is a matter of diversity. Ethically, since language is associated with culture, nationality, and identity, it is clearly contrary to the interests of the many to raise one language group above the others. This is a matter of inclusion. So what actions can be taken? I would like to mention one initiative in order to show that action is already being taken, even if the facts on the ground seem overwhelming. The Helsinki Initiative in Multilingualism in Scholarly Communication has a commitment to, amongst other activities, promote language diversity in research assessment, evaluation, and funding systems. Individuals and organizations such as ours can sign up and support this initiative. Helsinki advances 3 main recommendations to be adopted. To support the dissemination of research results for the full benefit of society, by ensuring researchers are merited for disseminating research results beyond academia and for interacting with heritage, culture, and society, and by ensuring there is equal access to research knowledge provided in a variety of languages. It also seeks to protect national infrastructures for publishing locally relevant research by ensuring not-for-profit journals and book publishers have both sufficient resources and the support needed to maintain high standards of quality control and research integrity, and by ensuring national journals and book publishers are safeguarded in their transition to open access. And thirdly, to promote language diversity in research assessment, evaluation, and funding systems by ensuring that in the process of expert-based evaluation, high-quality research is valued regardless of the publishing language or publication channel, and by ensuring that when metrics-based systems are utilized, journals and book publications in all languages are adequately taken into account. I will close with this reminder that these attributes of equity, diversity, and inclusion should be the main reference points in any ethical arguments about the problems of monolingualism in academia, because they focus the argument away from the intangible notions of what ought to be different and towards more tangible notions of why and the benefits that will come from any actions. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. It's really a possibility now to put any question. I have some of them, but I would rather give the floor to Petra Dan. I think that he announced already before to see something, to give a comment. You are still there, Petra? No? No? Okay. Okay. Then open discussion. Please, do you have some questions to Michael or to Andrei? I can just give a little, I just thought before that it was my case when I presented an article in English. Probably it was mostly US English. As I have received back from abroad, I have received back from the lecturer that I have to give to someone that will lecture in British English. So, do you think that the British is losing somehow, lastly?
Maybe I can say something as a British English speaker, that of course we like to think British English is best, but in practice I have noticed even amongst British academics that things like American spelling has become more common, and certainly the voices that one hears when people are speaking English as their second language is almost always a form of American English. But I don't think that is a problem, so long as we are all accustomed to it. The spoken language, everyone has their accents, and the American accents are encountered more often, and so therefore all of us are more familiar with it. So I think the differences there are small, and certainly they're very small compared to the differences that we have to encounter, both in terms of competence and the ability to communicate content when we're talking about differences between actually different languages rather than different user groups.
Thank you, Michael. Now you can follow with your questions, Luigi. Luigi, just switch on your microphone.
Yes, excuse me. Okay, in my introduction, I cited the word globalization. This word, according to me, is very important to be considered in our discussion, because we spoke about scientific, political power, but I have not listened the word economical power. Lingua franca is an aspect that cannot be forgotten by the economical power. So I wish to know which is the opinion of our speakers about this.
Shall I?
Shall you?
say-
Yes. Please, Michael.
Yes, I'm sure George will want to say something too. But George mentioned that there was also lingua economica. So we have this idea that there are various ways in which we might share our language. But what I take away from this is that each of these different forms, lingua franca, lingua economica, and so on, puts a focus on a different kind of content. And in my examples, I was trying to show that in addition, we even need other forms of non-spoken language, such as a language for music and perhaps a language for art, a language for cartography. So I think one part of this problem is the restriction that a particular kind of focus places on, let us say, globalization or on economics or on communication person to person. That's the second part of lingua franca, lingua economica. I also want to query the lingua part, the first part of that phrase, because not everything is encompassed in language, spoken or written language. So I want to be a bit more skeptical about how comprehensive a lingua franca actually is, because there are very many limitations to what can be communicated in any language, no matter how widely shared it is. So we have to choose a communication form that is appropriate for the content that we want to communicate, and that is only sometimes enabled by using language as opposed to music, let's say. And the other thing I want to pick up on is the point that George said about an infrastructure theory, the idea that perhaps language is just a sort of peripheral manifestation of the content that we're actually interested in. And what we need to do is to share understanding and concepts, however that is communicated, sometimes by a lingua franca, sometimes by other means.
I totally agree with you, Michael, and I enjoyed.
You have something to say?
I enjoyed a lot your presentation. Meantime, I was working through your CV to know where you were working, and I was very impressed about your performances. Indeed, again, I am not a linguist, I'm not a sociologist. I'm only a human being, and I had the advantage to practice both science and art, and I understand a lot from this. As Luigi said, and as I cited David Crystal, economical is the tool by which a language is imposed. Finally, this happened. So if I want to joke, I don't really want to joke. I wonder if in the future we'll pass from the English to Chinese, but this is another problem. What we like to emphasize is that I think we confuse a tool with a target. In science, what is it? This was the concept of the infrastructure. What we want to transmit is the concepts and meanings, but we have no other possibility to do it other than words. In music, the situation is a little bit different. Between doesn't matter which modality of writing we use, the classical one or the very modern one, and it was very impressive the modality in which the modern music is written. sketches and nothing to do with the system of the classical music. But the problem is that our brain has conformational the possibility to understand what is transmitted by music, the sense of music. But at this moment, it is not enough prepared to accept and to understand the meaning of the science. I remember a book of one of the masters in science fiction, Isaac Asimov. In one of his book, Foundation, he is talking on a planet in which the persons were communicated each to other, not by means of the language, but by means of the cerebral communication of the meaning. We are very far from this. So we need a language to transmit in science. But as Michael excellently pointed, we should English, but we should make all the effort in the sense of the using these languages in the principles of equity and in the possibility that everybody could use this instrument in the same way and to valorize the meaning of their research, at least in science, in the same way.
Thanks, Michael, and thanks, Andrei. What I said before, I can summarize saying that according to me, multinational companies prefer surely to have a lingua franca, English actually, because any other solution means additive costs for them. So they cannot easily accept a word where we can speak other language than one only. I think that economy is a really neck of the problem.
Yes, it's true, Luigi. The economy is forcing us to be practical. Are some other comments, please? Do you have other comments? Liv, do you want to speak? No?
Oh, no.
No, thank you.
Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Lastly, I was thinking about languages when I was assisting or looking to the opening of the Olympic Games. You have probably followed also some of you. And I was thinking why we are not singing the anthem of Olympic Games at least a little bit in Greek. Why we are singing in English? The Olympic Games came from Greece, so why are we not have at least one verse in Greek? I don't know if the Greek consent, but it would be very, very, very nice. Okay, we are very short. We have short time, but if there is no questions, I'm very glad to my colleagues, the two colleagues that with me presented some causes, some problems, some advantages, some disadvantages, positive, negative, and so on. And probably we'll speak more in the future. And we will see how long the English will be lingua franca. I will not see for my life, but the next generations. I would conclude this webinar with a quote that I find in the Facebook. It was written by somebody that is very dear to me, and it's about the mother tongue. The mother tongue is a window in our soul, a path to the deepest and quietest thoughts. It's the basis for understanding everything that surrounds us. It's a conceptual foundation on which we enter into relationship with others, learn, and are able to speak and learn other languages. I think that that's why we are all conserving our mother tongue. Thank you very much to everybody, and thanks to my two colleagues. I ask you to send me your slides. We will put your slides on the web, also on the AEPE and out of our laboratory. And thanks to all. And see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Lucia. Thanks very much for your efforts.
Thank you.
And it was very interesting. And your choice of the topic is really very, very, very good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you, Lucia.
Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias. Muy bien hecho.
Thank you, Lucia. Thank you,
Ciao.
Michael.
Ciao.
Yes, bye-bye.
Mhm.